Hey, history buffs and lovers of the absolutely bizarre. Now, picture this. It's July 1518 in Strasbourg. That's modern-day France, but back then it was part of the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor particularly good at preventing mass hysteria events, as we're about to discover. You're going about your medieval business, maybe avoiding the plague, dodging horse manure, wondering if you'll live to see 30, when suddenly one woman steps into the street and starts dancing. Not celebrating, not performing, not even dancing to music. Just dancing. Compulsively. Uncontrollably. Like she's been possessed by the spirit of a very determined fitness instructor. And here's where things go from, that's weird, to someone call a priest, a doctor, and maybe an exorcist. Within days, dozens of people join her. Then hundreds. They're dancing so hard that people are literally dying from exhaustion. This is the story of the dancing plague of 1518, an event so bizarre that if you pitched it as a movie script today, Hollywood would say it's too unrealistic. But it's completely historically documented fact. So buckle up, because we're about to explore one of history's weirdest mass hysteria events. And trust me, it makes modern TikTok dances look absolutely sane by comparison. Let's set the stage. Strasbourg in 1518 was not exactly a party town. This was a place where the biggest entertainment was watching public executions and arguing about whether the local priest was corrupt enough to warrant a good old-fashioned peasant uprising. The summer of 1518 was particularly rough. Crops had failed. Disease was spreading. The economy was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. People were stressed, hungry, and generally having the kind of year that makes you want to lie down and not get up until the Renaissance is over. Into this delightful atmosphere steps our patient zero, Frau Troffea. Now, historical records don't tell us much about Frau Troffea's background, but we can assume she was having a particularly bad day, even by medieval standards. On what should have been a perfectly ordinary July morning, Frau Troffea walks out of her house, steps into the narrow cobblestone street, and begins to dance. Not a little jig, not a celebratory skip. We're talking full-blown, arms flailing, feet stomping, interpretive dance madness. And she doesn't stop. Hour after hour, she keeps dancing. The neighbors gather around, probably thinking she's finally snapped under the pressure of medieval life. Which, fair enough, if I had to live in 1518, I'd probably lose my mind too. But this wasn't just a mental breakdown. This was something else entirely. As the day wore on, people became genuinely worried. Frau Troffea showed no signs of stopping. She wasn't responding to anyone trying to talk to her. She wasn't taking breaks for food or water. She was just dancing like her life depended on it, which, as we'll discover, might have been literally true in her mind. By nightfall, she was still going. By the next morning, she was still dancing. And that's when things got really weird, because other people started joining her. Now, you might think, well, maybe they were just trying to help, or maybe it looked like fun. But here's the thing about what happened next. These people weren't choosing to dance. They were compelled to dance, like something was forcing them to move against their will. And once they started, they couldn't stop. Within a week, dozens of people had joined Frau Troffea's unwilling dance party. And I want to be very clear about something. This wasn't a flash mob. This wasn't some medieval version of a protest dance. These people were genuinely distressed, terrified, and completely unable to control their own bodies. Imagine waking up, planning to go to work at your medieval job. Let's say you're a baker or a blacksmith, and instead finding yourself compulsively dancing in the town square alongside dozens of other people who are just as confused and terrified as you are. Historical records describe people crying while they danced, begging for help while their feet kept moving, collapsing from exhaustion only to get back up and continue dancing. This wasn't fun. This was a nightmare, and it was spreading like wildfire. By the end of July, somewhere between 50 and 100 people were affected. By August, historical accounts suggest that up to 400 people were dancing at the peak of the outbreak. 400 people. To put this in perspective, Strasbourg in 1518 had a population of maybe 20,000 people. So we're talking about roughly 2% of the entire city spontaneously developing an uncontrollable urge to dance. That's like if everyone in a modern neighborhood suddenly started doing the Macarena and couldn't stop. And here's where the story gets really dark. So I'm going to handle this with appropriate seriousness. People were dying. The human body isn't designed to dance nonstop for days or weeks. Historical records document heart attacks, strokes, and deaths from sheer exhaustion. Some accounts suggest that up to 15 people per day were dying at the peak of the outbreak. That's not a typo. 15 people per day, dancing themselves to death. The surviving records describe scenes that sound like something out of a horror movie. People dancing until they collapsed, their feet bleeding, their bodies completely depleted, only to somehow find the energy to get back up and continue moving. It was like the entire city had been cursed by some malevolent dance deity with a seriously twisted sense of humor. Now, faced with this unprecedented crisis, the local authorities, the city council, religious leaders, and various medieval experts gathered together to figure out what to do. And their solution was, well, let's just say it wouldn't win any awards for crisis management. Their first brilliant idea was to consult the local physicians, who immediately diagnosed the problem as hot blood, because apparently in 1518, hot blood was the medieval equivalent of have you tried turning it off and on again? The doctors prescribed the standard medieval cure for everything, bloodletting. Yes, their solution to people dancing themselves to death was to make them weaker by draining their blood. It's like treating a broken leg by removing the other leg for balance. Shockingly, this didn't work. Next, they brought in the priests, who declared that this was obviously divine punishment for the city's sins. Their solution? More prayer and religious ceremonies, which also didn't work, probably because whatever was causing people to dance uncontrollably wasn't particularly impressed by Latin chanting. But here's where the story takes a turn that would be hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. The authorities decided that the best way to cure uncontrollable dancing was more dancing. I'm not making this up. The city council actually hired professional musicians and built wooden stages, thinking that if they provided proper music and dance floors, the afflicted people would somehow dance it out of their systems. This is like trying to cure someone's gambling addiction by taking them to Vegas or treating alcoholism with a brewery tour. The logic was that if people danced in a proper way with actual music, it would somehow purge the evil spirits or bad humors or whatever medieval explanation they'd settled on. Predictably, this made everything worse. Much worse. The number of dancers increased dramatically. The official encouragement seemed to legitimize and amplify whatever psychological or physiological process was driving the outbreak. It's like they took a small fire and decided the best way to put it out was with gasoline. So what actually caused the dancing plague of 1518? Well, here's where things get really interesting, because even with 500 years of hindsight and modern scientific understanding, nobody can definitively explain what happened. The most widely accepted theory today is mass psychogenic illness, basically mass hysteria. The idea is that extreme stress, combined with cultural beliefs about dancing and religious possession, created a psychological contagion that spread through the community. Think about it. Strasbourg in 1518 was dealing with famine, disease, economic collapse, and general social upheaval. People were literally dying of stress. In that environment, one person's psychological break could trigger a chain reaction of similar breakdowns. But mass hysteria usually doesn't last for weeks and typically doesn't result in physical exhaustion to the point of death. So while this explanation makes some sense, it doesn't explain everything. Another popular theory is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye and other grains, and when consumed, it can cause hallucinations, seizures, and yes, uncontrollable movement. It's basically medieval LSD, but much more dangerous. The ergot theory would explain the involuntary movements and the duration of the outbreak. If the grain supply was contaminated, people could have been continuously exposed to the toxin for weeks or even months. But here's the problem. Ergot poisoning usually causes more varied symptoms, including violent seizures and gangrene. The dancing plague was remarkably specific in its effects, just dancing, nothing else. Some historians have suggested it might have been a combination of factors. malnutrition weakening people's mental resistance, cultural beliefs about supernatural possession making dancing seem like a plausible affliction, and possibly some form of environmental toxin triggering the initial episodes. There's also the fascinating cultural context. Medieval people genuinely believed in dancing manias, demonic possession, a divine punishment through involuntary movement. In some sense, the dancing plague happened because people believed it could happen. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but with more cardiovascular failure. So how did it end? Well, after weeks of failed medical treatments, ineffective religious interventions, and that spectacularly backfired fight fire with fire approach, the authorities finally tried something different. They decided to take the dancers on a pilgrimage to a shrine outside the city dedicated to Saint Vitus, who was, conveniently, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics. Apparently, medieval people believed in very specific saint specializations. The idea was that Saint Vitus would either cure the dancers or at least take responsibility for the whole mess. Kind of like medieval technical support, if you can't fix the problem, escalate it to a higher authority. And remarkably, this actually worked. Not immediately and not completely, but gradually people began to recover. Whether it was the change of environment, the psychological impact of religious ritual, the physical exhaustion finally overwhelming whatever was driving them to dance, or just the natural end of whatever had caused the outbreak in the first place, the dancing plague of 1518 finally came to an end. But the recovery wasn't instant or complete. Some people took weeks to fully stop the involuntary movements. Others suffered long-term physical and psychological effect from their ordeal. A few never fully recovered, and the city of Strasbourg was left to grapple with one of the most bizarre episodes in human history, with no real understanding of what had happened or why. The official records were carefully preserved, probably because even medieval bureaucrats realized they'd witnessed something unprecedented. Those records are why we know so much about the dancing plague today. It was documented with the kind of detail usually reserved for royal births and military campaigns. So what can we learn from the dancing plague of 1518? Well, first and most obviously, when faced with mass hysteria, maybe don't encourage more of the thing that's causing the hysteria. That seems like common sense, but apparently it needed to be learned the hard way. But more seriously, the dancing plague illustrates something fascinating about human psychology and social contagion. Under extreme stress, communities can develop shared delusions or psychosomatic symptoms that spread like viruses. We've seen similar phenomena throughout history. The laughing epidemics in Tanzania in the 1960s, the Salem witch trials, even modern cases of mass psychogenic illness in schools and workplaces. And let's be honest, in our modern world of social media and instant communication, we're probably more susceptible to psychological contagion than ever before. We've all seen how quickly panic, conspiracy theories, and behavioral fads can spread online. The dancing plague also reminds us how cultural beliefs and expectations can shape our physical experiences. These people weren't faking their symptoms. They were genuinely unable to control their movements. But their specific symptoms were influenced by their cultural understanding of possession, divine punishment, and supernatural affliction. It's a reminder that the line between mind and body, between psychological and physical illness, isn't as clear as we sometimes think. Most importantly, though, the dancing plague shows us the importance of evidence-based responses to crisis. The authorities in 1518 tried bloodletting, prayer, and encouraging more dancing because those were the tools they understood. They didn't have the scientific method, controlled studies, or modern medicine. Today, when we face mysterious outbreaks or unexplained phenomena, we have better tools for investigation and response. But we still need the wisdom to use them properly and the humility to admit when we don't understand what's happening. And that, my friends, is the story of the dancing plague of 1518. A bizarre episode that proves truth really is stranger than fiction, and that medieval crisis management makes modern bureaucracy look like a masterclass in efficiency. If this story made you grateful for modern medicine and evidence-based public health responses, smash that like button like it's a medieval dance floor. Hit subscribe for more historical mysteries that will make you question everything you think you know about human behavior, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an episode.